how 8,000 preschool children had their photos, names, medical and safeguarding data stolen, and some were posted on the dark web for anyone to download.
Nap time, playtime, birthday parties, every intimate moment.
The hackers had one username and password. That's all it took.
Half of Britain's schools still lack basic security measures. Your child's school is probably one of them.
Today, an expert who works inside schools every day tells us what parents need to ask right now.
Because the next breach could have your child's face in it.
He's the guy with the plan for your online life. Keeps your data safe, cuts through the strife. Small biz owners, yeah, this is your guide. Cyber threats, beware, no place to hide. The Small Business Cybersecurity Guy, guarding your world with a sharp eagle eye. Tips and tricks to keep your systems tight. Stay secure, stay strong in the digital.
Welcome back to the Small Business Cybersecurity Guy podcast. I'm Noel Bradford, and joining me as always are Movin McLeod and Graham Faulkner. In the last week, I took a hot take on the Kiddo International nursery breach, where the data of 8,000 preschool children was stolen and posted online. The response was massive.
Absolutely massive. Our inbox filled up with parents, educators, and school leaders all asking the same question. How safe is my child's data? And honestly, after that hot take and your subsequent social posts, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My kids aren't in nursery anymore, but the idea that someone's clicking through photos of toddlers on the dark web, that's the stuff of nightmares.
Right. Today, we have an expert joining us. Someone who works in the education sector day in and day out. Tammy Buchanan from Data Protection Education.
Tammy, for our listeners who might not be familiar with your background, you've been working in the UK education sector since 2010. That's 15 years of watching how schools handle data protection and cybersecurity.
That's right, Graham, and thank you all for such a warm welcome. To answer your question, yes, I currently work as a school consultant for data protection education, focusing on data protection compliance, information security, and a bit of cybersecurity in schools. However, before that, I worked in schools for 12 years, 8 years as a technician and 4 as an IT manager.
So, Tammy, you've been a Dave from IT yourself. You know what it's like at the coalface.
Precisely, Movin. That experience has really shaped how I approach consultancy now, because working in a school is like nothing else.
Right, we'll come back to that. But first, let's get straight into it. Tammy, over those 15 years, has the sector improved in this area, or have the threats evolved faster than the defences?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think we all know that COVID pushed everything forward, particularly schools, literally overnight. They had to magic up some new devices for staff with no clear guidelines, no established configuration, and not necessarily the necessary expertise. So they were thrown probably years ahead of where they were. Obviously, threats are moving very, very fast at the moment for various reasons. Schools struggle to keep up with that. A lot of the smaller schools, particularly primary, infants and nurseries, don't have anyone looking at cyber strategy and looking at the threat landscape, so they can't keep up.
What? Wait, Tammy, so COVID didn't just accelerate digital adoption, it basically threw schools into the deep end without teaching them to swim first.
Movin, that's precisely what happened. And the thing is, they're still catching up from that.
The COVID acceleration is a recurring theme we're seeing across multiple industries. But schools had it particularly rough because they were already operating on limited budgets and resources.
Right, let's discuss Kiddo International specifically. Tammy, we got talking after I posted on LinkedIn about the Kiddo International breach. Now, I'm assuming Kiddo isn't one of your customers because I don't think you'd have time to talk to us today if they were.
Correct, they're not.
When the Kiddo breach happened, it seems to come down to a lack of MFA on their nursery management platform called Family. Was this an outlier, or does this reflect the sector as it is at the moment?
I think it completely reflects it. One of the first questions we ask, whether it's during online compliance calls or while walking around schools, is, do you have MFA set up? Most people visibly cringe when I ask that. I would say compared to last year, there's considerably more. That roughly half of the schools I speak to have it on now, compared to probably 20-30% last year.
Hold on. Only half the schools have MFA enabled now? That means half don't. And that's an improvement from the 20-30% of last year? Wow.
Yes, and in terms of how it works across all the various school types, it's no surprise that slightly smaller schools such as nurseries, infants and primaries don't have MFA on.
That's terrifying when you think about it. We're talking about children's data here.
I think some of that improvement is due to the push from the Department of Education's digital standards document. Some of it is due to the recent cyber attacks in the news, and some of it is a natural progression. Many schools are transitioning from SIMS to Arbor, which involves moving from on-premises to cloud-based systems, making the process more understandable.
So what are they relying on then? Just passwords?
Yes, frankly, and I went on a data walk this week in a setting and asked if the iPads had PIN codes on, for example. They said absolutely they do. So I picked one up, clicked on the screen, it went straight to the homepage, and I was able to look at the photos. That is, sadly, typical.
So there's policy theatre happening. They've got the policy document that says everything's secure, but the reality on the ground is entirely different.
Sometimes a policy or configuration may be in place, but it's not centralised in smaller organisations, and that's where it comes a bit unstuck. But then there's the responsibility of ensuring that it's set. So MFA or a PIN might have been set at one point, but for whatever reason, it may no longer be in place. So every person in the organisation must understand that it's their responsibility. If they have a device that's not working as the organisation policy dictates, they need to raise their hand and say, this isn't working as I expect it to. It's not IT's responsibility to keep going around checking because they obviously don't have the time to do that. I think we see a lot of that. People, if it gives them an easy life, they will leave it be.
Tammy, that's the compliance versus actual security issue we discuss all the time. Ticking boxes without doing the work.
And if nobody's checking, the security degrades over time without anyone noticing until there's a breach.
Before we delve into the shared responsibility model, let's discuss your background. You mentioned you worked in schools for 12 years, 8 as a technician, 4 as an IT manager. So, you're a recovering Dave. And nobody gets it unless they've been one. Does that hands-on experience shape how you look at data protection now?
No, actually, no, my morals and my rules don't change. However, I can offer them some practical advice. And honestly, when I first meet customers and tell them I've worked in schools before, you literally see their shoulders relax. Somebody gets it. So if you've never worked in a school, you may not understand what I'm saying. Working in a school is like nothing else.
How so? I mean, we hear this all the time, but what makes schools so different?
Prior to working in schools, I worked in the software industry. I was a help desk manager supporting software at pre-sales and post-sales. That was a breeze compared to working in schools. It's absolutely a different world. So it's really important to schools that they know they have someone who understands where they are. But it also allows me to say, no, hold on a minute, you still can't do that. I have experience doing it this way.
So you're not lowering the bar. You're just explaining how to actually reach it in the real world.
Exactly. And I speak to schools all the time and say, you know, I've seen this excellent example of cyber resilience working this way under your circumstances, and they're doing it fantastically. And that's the best that I can do, give them experiences that I see, because they are going to listen to other schools much more than they're going to listen to some cybersecurity expert that comes in, which absolutely isn't me, by the way. I do know how schools operate, and I have some understanding of how their brains work in that respect.
That peer-to-peer learning model is particularly effective in education. Schools trust other schools more than external consultants because they understand the shared constraints.
All right, let's discuss these platforms. Family, Arbor, Bromcom, Tapestry. What's the best practice for configuration? Are they making it easy for schools to turn on security?
Or Are they charging extra for things like MFA, which, frankly, should be a standard feature? In fact, I think that any company that charges extra for MFA is immoral and should be named and shamed. But I digress.
Right, so Family and Tapestry are slightly different to the other systems. Family and Tapestry are for early years only, so it's recording the child's learning journey. The difference is that they record that journey in lots of photos, so more photos than you would see in a primary school and definitely more than in a secondary school. So it's content rich. They'll be doing it daily, hourly, taking photos and writing notes.
Meaning that these early years platforms are particularly data rich, with constant photo documentation.
Yes, and the nursery practitioners will walk around with an iPad, so they're recording as they do it. So they're doing it on a mobile device. And that isn't how an MIS take Arbor, for example. So they would use that to take the register or check whether someone has a medical condition or allergy. So it's very different.
Which makes security even more critical, not less. If you're walking around with an iPad full of children's photos, that device better be locked down tight.
My experience with Arbor has been quite extensive over the last 18 months. A whole local authority of schools that I look after has moved from on-premise SIMs to Arbor. And I have to say, bearing in mind I'm not a customer, they've been absolutely fantastic, pointed me at videos. From what I can tell, their support is really, really good. They provide a lot of videos.
So some providers are doing it right. But I understand the family thing was just a checkbox. And it is off by default.
Additionally, you'd be accessing it more frequently. So what prevents schools from implementing MFA is that staff simply don't have the time. They just don't have time to put in the authentication code. So what schools can do, though, is ring fence their IP addresses so that in school, if you're using a school device, you're not prompted constantly, which many schools do. You have to have specific extra licensing to do that, particularly for email. It's whether the setting has the expertise in-house for someone to set that up. I would imagine that's very unlikely in a nursery in a smaller setting.
So there are solutions. You can configure it so staff aren't constantly entering codes when they're on school premises using school devices. However, that requires technical expertise that nurseries often lack.
And presumably the budget for the licensing.
They don't think to ask for it, and surprisingly, the provider won't think to offer it.
There's your problem right there. The shared responsibility model is breaking down completely.
This seems like a good point to discuss the regulatory direction. The Department for Education mandated that the further education sector achieve Cyber Essentials certification by the end of the last academic year. Tammy, is it inevitable that this trickles down to schools and early years settings?
Or might it go the other way? Suddenly, the government says all nurseries must be Cyber Essentials certified. Could the kiddo incident accelerate that?
I don't think that's possible. I absolutely don't believe that's possible at all. I agree with you that there are now a few trusts that have Cyber Essentials accreditation. What you need to remember is that trusts will typically have upwards of 500 employees. So they're bigger than most local companies.
So, the bigger multi-academy trusts can achieve it because they have proper IT teams.
Yes, and when they reach about 6 schools in the trust, particularly if that includes a secondary school or 2, they tend to adopt a more business-oriented approach. So they will have that more than just Dave, the IT manager. They'll have a complete team of technicians. But more importantly, what's lacking in the smaller schools is the governance level of cyber resilience and cyber strategy. And that's where it needs to start. So if you don't have that, it can never ripple down to the bottom. The push for initiatives like Cyber Essentials or other accredited programs needs to start at the top.
However, your average primary school or nursery typically lacks that governance infrastructure.
What schools should be looking towards at the moment is using the DFE digital standards. They came out in 2022 and they were updated over the summer. The DFE has not mandated the standard but hasn't stated it is statutory yet. But they've mentioned 6 of those standards, which include the cybersecurity standard. All schools and colleges should look towards meeting those standards before 2030. Think of the DFE digital standard as cyber essentials tailored for education, albeit without the official certificate for now, at least.
2030. That's 5 years away.
I know this podcast relates more to small businesses, and in fact, most private nurseries are small businesses. They should also look towards it. Somebody has created this great best practice list. Why wouldn't you use it? And it covers things like MFA, everything you need to know about cybersecurity, best practices for your network and the infrastructure, which is often overlooked in schools.
What do you mean by forgotten, Tammy?
They like the nice cherry on top of the icing. You know, the sector loves the glitter, the iPads, the fancy screens and all of that. And they forget that underneath it all is the glue, or in this case, the network needs to be up to the job. Everything is moving to the cloud, so they need an excellent broadband connection. You need great Wi-Fi because everybody suddenly needs mobile devices, but everyone wants those mobile devices, yet they don't understand the cost. There's a strategy behind those devices that sit underneath.
Ouch. Do tell us more.
When I was Dave, I once went to work and there was a brand new pile of lovely shiny iPads that I knew nothing about sitting on my desk. I wasn't told they were coming. There was no review of the strategy or structure of how that might fit into our existing organisation and infrastructure. However, this is not all. The DFE digital standards also examine the entire strategy of the organisation. That's not just about teaching and learning. It's about business strategy, school strategy, and everything in between. When they're buying something, they consider all of those factors.
Which is just how most small businesses like to think they work. But they really don't.
Which raises the question, why wouldn't they be using that best practice? They have never heard of them, which is the worrying thing. And that should be coming from the governing body and the head teachers.
Schools haven't even heard of the DFE digital standards. That's the problem right there.
How can they implement something they don't know exists?
Right, let's talk about governance then. As we always say, cybersecurity isn't an IT problem, it's a board-level issue, like any other risk. In the education world, that means it's a problem for governors. However, from what I understand, school governors are volunteers who are already overextended.
I've been approached to be on a couple of governing bodies over the years, and the vibe I got was very much, we need someone on the board, but we're not going to listen to them, which is why I didn't do it. Tammy, how do we convince school governors that this is a serious issue? Does it need legislation?
I think it does need legislation. It requires those digital standards to be included in something like Ofsted or be directly related to safeguarding. Schools listen to 3 things: Ofsted, safeguarding, and other schools. One of the first questions I'm often asked about policies, particularly those related to data protection or compliance, is whether they are statutory. Do I have to do it? Because I'm only doing it if it's statutory.
So, schools respond to statutory requirements, Ofsted inspections, and safeguarding obligations. Until cybersecurity is explicitly tied to one of those 3 things, it remains optional in practice.
Currently, best practice isn't statutory, but it might lead to something that is statutory. So we try to engage at the governor level, but often there isn't anyone on the governing body who takes on that role. Which is multiple non-conformities in itself right there. The Leadership and Governance DFE digital standard actually says the governing body should have a digital lead on the board. The ICO suggests that there should be a data protection lead. Now, often those 2 end up being the same person. I speak to lots of schools and their governing body aren't full. You might have half a dozen people who are already doing health and safety and so on.
So you're asking volunteers to take on yet another responsibility when they're already doing multiple jobs.
If there's one person that's better than none, it's finding that person. Then, like you said, having them listened to. Currently, they lack significant power because ultimately they are volunteers. However, it is their role and responsibility to ensure that schools are implementing specific measures, including data protection and cyber resilience. However, the head teacher or principal must be open to that, as it's they who ultimately make the decision.
So the governors don't have authority, the head teacher might not prioritise it. Who actually gets things done?
So often when I'm having my compliance meetings, I'm not meeting with anyone in SLT, I'm meeting the school business manager because, let's face it, they are actually the person who gets everything done in the school. The move from the standards over the summer, which state that you must meet these 6 standards by 2030, is a significant shift. And I really won't be surprised if it ends up being part of an Ofsted type inspection.
The school business manager is doing everything, but lacks the necessary authority. The head teacher has the authority, but might not prioritise it. And the governors are volunteers without teeth.
That's a recipe for disaster. Right, so here's the question everyone's asking. Will the kiddo breach actually make a difference? Or in 6 months, will it be business as usual?
With my cynical hat on, it would be handy if it had been an MP's child on that list. That aside, Tammy, do you think this could be a turning point?
You kind of hope so. I feel probably not. So what you've got to remember about schools is they don't have any money to give to hackers. The only thing they really care about in that instance is their reputation, which is why we hardly ever see these stories in the news. We know of schools that have had cyber attacks like this, and it's never in the news.
So schools are having breaches all the time. We don't hear about them because they're keeping it quiet.
This is probably in the news because of Joe Tidy, the BBC correspondent, because the bad actors contacted him directly. Otherwise, would we have been aware of it? I don't know. Maybe somebody might have spotted it on the ICO breach log at some point. I think these things are happening, particularly in schools, but we don't really know about them. I think some schools might take it on board and say that would be a good reason to enforce MFA, but I don't think it's been explicitly stated that that was the cause at the moment. So unless they see it in black and white, okay, this is what caused it.
Which means parents have no idea how vulnerable their children's data actually is.
I also think that many of them lack the capabilities to implement it. As we mentioned, technicians may visit every 2 months for 2 hours. It depends on how high it is on their to-do list and whether it would take 2 hours or not. If it takes more than 2 hours, they might not actually be allowed the time or get paid to do it in reality. Yeah, so people like us, and especially podcasts like yours, sharing it with schools is the best way forward. I think the government need to invest more money in the infrastructure in some way and push it up the agenda.
Tammy, that's just terrifying. And the only reason we know about Kiddo is that the hackers contacted Noel's mate, Joe Tidy, at the BBC directly.
Tammy, let me ask you about the early years sector specifically. How often do you work with nurseries and preschools? Because they seem to operate very differently from primary and secondary schools.
Yeah, not as much as obviously the primary and secondary schools, and they're very different. And as you said, they operate differently from schools. So, for example, the Kiddo one was a private nursery chain, as I understand.
That's right, 18 nurseries around the globe, mainly in London, and reportedly turning over in the region of 20 million quid.
So you have the private ones like Kiddo, and then you have some that are entirely part of mainstream schools, and they tend to align with school policies. So they operate entirely differently, and you might also find a mainstream school that has a third-party nursery set within it, so it's kind of under that umbrella, but they don't share data, devices or networks.
So, even within the early years, there's enormous variation in how they're set up and governed.
Exactly. They're constrained in staff. There's a stringent ratio of children to adults, and we see this in primary schools as well. People will be working down to the second for what they're paid. For example, if we suggest they need data protection or cybersecurity training, the owners or managers will say, I need to pay them this amount of time to sit and do the training outside of their work hours. There's not a lot of flexibility. There aren't many devices in the nursery either, so you will tend to get one iPad per room. So depending on how many rooms the nursery has, you might get a laptop or desktop in the nursery office or one for the principal, and that's it. So the devices are minimal, which then means there's no centralised management at all. They're done on a one-by-one basis. And because they think, we've only got 6 devices, Dave can manage it and he comes in once every half term. If they work by terms, that is, they might be 52 weeks a year, so maybe 4 times a year. So they're very low key in terms of that because it's very much about the children.
So nurseries have even fewer resources than primary schools. 1 iPad per room, possibly 6 devices in total, and a technician who visits once every half term.
And those devices are being used to take hundreds of photos of children every day, with no centralised management and probably no MFA.
Exactly.
We've painted a fairly grim picture. Let's talk solutions. Tammy, what actually works? What does pragmatic look like when you're dealing with typical school budgets?
Right, yes. When we walk around, we will provide a summary of the digital standards. So physical security is something they can see and understand. So in the digital standards, there's a server standard. It's very precise about the best room size. It mustn't have a window, no liquids or batteries nearby. So it's a straightforward checklist. Now, very few schools will ever meet that particular standard because if you go into a small infant school, they have 9 or 10 rooms. There's no spare room to put it. So it has to go in the most secure room. However, if you can show them and discuss it, I've seen servers in PE cupboards, in corridors, and even under people's desks.
Physical security. That's brilliant. Start with what they can see and understand. A server in a PE cupboard next to the football bibs.
So if you can explain what would happen if someone spilt coffee on it, it's going to be a cyber incident, right? Someone letting the building in the evening, such as an outside organisation, might unplug it and walk away with it. The cleaner could spill something on it if it's not locked away. So it's all about what they can actually see. The same goes for iPads in trolleys. Why aren't they locked away? What happens to them at the end of the day? They're locked with a key. Okay, what happens to that key? Oh, we put it in this Tupperware box and it's just on the side. Why isn't it in a key cabinet?
That's excellent practical consultancy. Taking abstract cybersecurity concepts and translating them into physical analogies.
Another thing is discussing processes. One of the significant mistakes schools make when transitioning to the cloud is that they take all their paper-based processes with them. That's probably another reason why MFA isn't on there, because the paper likely wasn't locked in the cabinet to begin with. It was perhaps just on the side in a tray. So it's going back to the process. Okay, what are you actually doing? What are you looking at? What do you need to keep safe? How will you keep it safe? And guide them through that process. And there'll be several steps in there that they won't really need to be doing.
So, Tammy, you're helping them strip out the unnecessary complexity while adding the necessary security.
And of course, we always discuss MFA. We discuss the news, but as I mentioned, it's minimal because schools don't share that information. Schools listen to other schools, as I've already said, and then we'll send a list of links to the DFE digital standards on how they could improve things. So I always say document as much as possible. For example, if there was a data breach or a cybersecurity incident, such as someone clicking on a phishing email and a lot of data was compromised, one of the first things the ICO would ask is whether that person had undergone cyber training.
Document everything. That's the key takeaway. When the ICO comes knocking, if you can't prove staff had training, you're in trouble.
Therefore, you should be implementing simple measures such as documenting training and conducting cybersecurity training annually, as mandated by the DFE digital standards. But more than that, having general awareness, overshare what you're doing and make sure it's documented. Also document the risks. So in that server example, I don't have another room to put my server in to keep it secure. So we decided to buy this cabinet and put it here. We have assessed the risks and these are the identified risks. I think the issue is that in many circumstances, these risks aren't even considered. They are overlooked because ultimately, I believe they don't fully understand that hackers will target their systems.
They think they've got nothing worth stealing.
They really don't get that. They say, we don't have anything. They possess the most precious thing, children's data.
So, schools think children's data isn't valuable. That's because they're not thinking like criminals. A child's name, photo, and home address don't expire. It's valuable for years, if not decades.
This reminds me of what we often hear from small businesses. We're too small. nobody would bother with us.
Exactly, it's the same mindset. We say to people, why haven't you got cyber insurance? They say, I don't need it. However, they do have public liability insurance.
Alternatively, that's what we have cyber insurance for, to take care of a breach. Really? Well, with that Windows 7 machine that I can see plugged in over there, good luck claiming. If you have an out-of-support device on your network, you're paying the premium for it, but you don't have any coverage.
Yeah, so actually you've hit on an excellent point there. We often see old devices in schools, such as Windows 10 devices and occasionally even Windows 7, trying to explain that they shouldn't be on the network. They often don't get it unless you've got an IT person there who really understands why. From their point of view, I'm suggesting they take a resource away from a child's teaching and learning, which obviously they don't want to do.
So from their perspective, you're the bad guy, suggesting they take a working computer away from a child, even though that computer is a security risk to everyone.
That's the emotional versus logical argument. It's hard to win when you're perceived as taking resources away from children.
And it illustrates why the governance and strategy level is so important. Those decisions shouldn't be happening at the IT technician level.
Right, Tammy, if you could get a room full of school leaders, heads, chairs of governors, lock the doors and make them listen, what would you say to them?
I would discuss the general cyber resilience and cybersecurity ethos throughout their entire organisation. I have actually done a workshop with some SLT in a trust. I've done it a couple of times, in fact, and I've worked through some real life scenarios. But the critical point from my perspective is that it's a brief quiz about roles and responsibilities. So there's a little question, whose role and responsibility is this? And generally speaking, they think everything is IT.
Everything defaults to poor Dave.
So we do it as a little bit of a competition. And then this is the head teacher's responsibility, this one. This is the governor's responsibility. This is SLT's responsibility. This is the department head. It's just explaining all the responsibilities. And then responsibility is one thing, that's a doing thing. And then who is accountable? So pointing out in the room who is responsible, understanding the process and the procedure. If an incident happens, do they know what to do? So you can go through, for example, and create a sandbox scenario. No one will ever say, I'll go get my cyber incident response plan.
Nobody.
Never. I've done it a few times and it hasn't happened yet, not once. Then they'll go, but we've got one, but do you know what's in it? Do you know where it is? Do you know how to get it? And they never have. Generally speaking, some of the larger trusts maybe, but I have personally experienced this in a trust where nobody followed the cyber incident response plan, not even the IT person.
Have they tested it? That's always my question. You can have the best plan in the world, but if nobody knows where it is or what's in it, it's useless.
So I would say those things and obviously continue with the training, awareness, everything all the time and change it up a bit. For example, the NCSE has staff training for school staff. However, it's not changed in 3 years. So if you put on the same video 3 years in a row, let's face it, it's not going to go in. It won't discuss the recent incidents, for example. So keep changing it, keep people aware, feed them little bits of information. And actually, that's why on our news page, we print a lot of info for free. We give it to schools and say, just send this out to staff, send this to governors, because they might read something there and it might stop an incident, or you might have an incident happening and someone will know what to do.
The point about training being 3 years out of date is crucial. The threat landscape changes constantly.
I would love to sit in a room full of governors and have that conversation. I'd probably be quite annoying.
Can I come? I can be really annoying.
Yes, you can really be annoying, but I'm coming too. I'll bring the popcorn. Because that sounds like the kind of uncomfortable conversation that needs to happen.
Wow, we're up against the clock. Even with Graham's exceptional editing skills, we will run this into a second show.
Hey, that isn't very polite. It assumes Tammy wants to stick around for more. Oh, that's more than acceptable. I am more than happy to keep talking. There's so much more to discuss.
That's great. So Tammy, final question for now. If any school leaders are listening to this, or educational organisations that want to find out more, Where can they contact you? Is it via LinkedIn?
Yes, I'm available on LinkedIn. Please feel free to contact me. Data Protection Education has a LinkedIn page and I'm pretty active on it. I actually publish most of the content and articles on there. Or email info@dataprotection.education. All our team members have experience working in schools or with school settings. We also have a solicitor on the team. We tend to get customers when a crisis is happening, unfortunately. However, we'd love to hear from you.
Join the club on the crisis thing. That seems to be when people finally take security seriously.
For listeners, we'll include all of Tammy's contact details in the show notes, along with links to the DFE digital standards and the other resources mentioned today.
If you're a parent listening to this and you're worried about your child's data, start asking questions. Ask your school or nursery, do you have MFA enabled? How often do staff get cybersecurity training? What's your incident response plan? Schools need to know that parents care about this.
And if you're a school leader, please don't wait to be the next kiddo. Start with the basics. Enable MFA. Document your training. Know where your incident response plan is and actually test it.
Right, as always, if you found this useful, hit subscribe. Leave us a review, share it with other parents or educators who need to hear this. Please leave a comment telling us which security topic you would like us to cover in the future. And visit the blog at thesmallbusinesscybersecurityguy.co.uk for more resources.
Stay safe out there and consider checking the security measures your child's school has in place.
Until next time, we will carry on the discussions with Tammy.
Before we let you go completely, let's have a brief discussion about the necessary but tedious legal details. Don't worry, I'll make this as painless as possible. First, and this is important, everything we've said today represents our own personal opinions and experiences. These views are ours alone and don't represent any organisation we work for, any employers, advertisers, sponsors, or anyone else who might be connected to the show. When we offer advice or share our thoughts, it comes from us as individuals, not on behalf of anyone else. Everything we've talked about today is for general guidance. It's intended to guide you in the right direction, but it shouldn't be treated as professional advice tailored specifically to your business. Your situation is unique. What works brilliantly for a Birmingham bakery might be utterly useless for a Manchester marketing agency. We do our very best to keep everything accurate and current, but let's be honest here. The cybersecurity world moves faster than a caffeinated squirrel being chased by Mauvin's Jack Russell Terrier. Things can change between when we record and when you're listening, so always double check critical technical details with qualified professionals before you go making any changes to your systems. If we've mentioned any websites, products or services, we're providing you with information, not necessarily endorsing them. We can't be responsible for what happens on their end or if things go sideways when you use them. Some of the things we recommend may involve affiliate partnerships. We'll always flag those when they arise because, well, transparency. Now, if you're dealing with serious cybersecurity incidents, actual data breaches, or complex legal compliance issues, please consult with qualified professionals rather than relying solely on advice from a free podcast. We're here to educate and help you understand the landscape, not to replace your security consultant, legal, or IT team. Finally, and this is important, while we genuinely want to help you improve your security, we can't accept liability for any losses or problems that may occur as a result of following our suggestions. We are all IT and cybersecurity professionals. However, we are not your official contracted consultants. We care about your business, but we're not your insurance policy. Stay safe out there, keep learning, and remember, when in doubt, get a second opinion from someone who can see your specific situation. This has been a Small Business Cybersecurity Guy, Pro Suction, copyright 2025, all rights reserved.
Today, we share the tools to keep threats away. Stay sharp, stay smart, protect your gear. The Small Biz Cyber Guy is always near. Click subscribe and join the ride. Together we'll shield the digital tide. Your business is strong when your data's secure. The Small Biz Cyber Guy, here to ensure. The Small Biz Cyber Guy says goodbye. Until next time, keep your day